然后连接些的缺他们这干的那么能儿子那有的搞不了，刚来也没对吧？搞让个每年注定能过的是，电脑啊拿心，俺真的给落的了，俺电子马里巴些是的了过的些，其实的，的那个真把拿心去，我呢说来的那要的别是呢，那个刚来嘛让我们拿心的要嘛的些，其实的。刚来嘛，就让我们这边拿现金没办法，的这真比落的老些的点真热是，但的这个拿现的也没办的东巴的东尼是，的多一个段大了，觉得这把车上东巴一里啊，这把个这么大些的，这把车上些的都是那个加上做都虚弱的。
Good morning. So last night we continued to look at how to meditate on reality, how to meditate on emptiness. So the true existence is how phenomena appear to us, as if they exist from their own side or by way of their own nature or essence. And the consciousness then that grasps at phenomena as existing truly, again, in other words, that their way of appearing and the way of existing is the same, that consciousness is called the consciousness of true grasping. Then if we ask ourselves, in reality, do phenomena exist in the way that they spontaneously or innately appear to consciousness or not? We investigate and we come to see that they do not exist in the way that they appear. The way of appearing and the way of existing is not in accordance. Therefore, the consciousness of true grasping is grasping at phenomena as existing in a way that they do not in reality. Therefore, that consciousness is one of ignorance. It's a wrong consciousness. Understanding this, the consciousness that understands that that is an ignorance, a wrong consciousness, this is in accordance with reality. It is a wisdom. And in particular, it's a wisdom realizing emptiness. The wisdom that realizes phenomena are empty of existing in the way they appear, empty of true existence. So last night, we continued to look at how to meditate on emptiness.
ane digi lo shen za lo no zhe za di ji su zhe lo nyo mo ba jian de ane nga zu lia dong han yo de di yong guo le che le jine za da nga zu ngui ni zu yu gi ngui ni su de ha gu guo le do gu guo le ding wo do ba na ngui ni su de ga zhen che kan de xin ne ho ra xin yu zhe dong ba na wa na xin a na wa na xin ji me ba na wa na xin ji ge rang wen de na wa na xin dong ba de le你多过来些，因为多白那个种为你是多通过来是，现在因为你是通白那，你个渐渐的按这个来，论鸟毛病的结果嘛，也是论鸟毛病的结果嘛，论鸟毛病的嘛结果那，按你按这个按东安鸟也给有具体啥个嘛来是，今天啥的，那东白你多过来的结情不来，现在的总数么了嘛。
Understanding that the consciousness of true grasping is a wrong consciousness, we can then understand too that being a wrong consciousness, it must be eradicated. Furthermore, that this wrong consciousness, this ignorance, is the very root cause from which all our afflictions, anger, attachment, pride, and so forth, arise. Therefore, all our experiences of suffering arise from this ignorance. Understanding that then encourages us to strive to come to understand reality, to understand that phenomena are empty of existing in the way that they appear. When this is realized, then the contrary minds, those of the class of the afflictions, will not arise. And with the afflictions not arising, the causes for suffering are not accumulated. Hence, it's of great importance to understand this topic of emptiness and meditate on it.
강라야 마도바 랑고 ngöne 기거를 베서 니게와 되어 말아 강라야 마도 랑고 ngöne 게와 되어 말해서
All impermanent phenomena, they do arise, but they do not arise independently.
단 아니 랑고 ngöne 마제나 간스 기거를네 기에스규다 기에 현실을 되네 기거를 되네 게와마도 아니 마도바 가야마도 랑고네 기와 메바래 마제바자다 현을 되네 기거를 해서 현실을 되네 기거를 해서
Permanent phenomena do arise, but not independently. So how do they arise? As they are interdependent. They are dependent on causes and conditions.
자다 기에서는 뒤지치 기네야 가줘요와 기에서는 간점질에 가줘고와 매바차고와 가줘요와 제산 가바디야 아니 가바디야 규단 기 현실을 되네 가글마도 강라에 마도 랑응원에 가바디요 말했어 랑원에 가바디요 말했어
Furthermore, what has arisen will also cease, but it will not cease independently or from its own side by way of its own nature. So again, what has arisen will cease, but that ceasing is not independent.
어디나신다 가파메바 김변바서 도르두로시시나 디르와 다디나신 체바메바 따메바스데 체바세데 비능아 주기 다 주기 뇽모버릭티기 바 직두시기 뇽모버릭이네 마저 로콤발레티네 남냠는 제바데 뇽모버릭티 파직 가네 마 체줘에 메바서 균체조로와다 균체요 디스 체바데이네 랑신기 균체바요 말에 랑신기 강라이마도 랑고 ngöne 균체바 메바데 체바 메바세 제나다 아니 가르레 진정어스네 녀보 공부 돕기 아니 고 뇽모발 녀보 땡지다 아니 가슴질 뇽모바디 아니 마 체르 메바 차 체르 고레체 체바 용고레체 체바디야 아니 샹라 되네 체나마도 랑고 ngöne 체바스요 말에서 당도 도르두슈네 디차고레
That, in brief, is the first pair of the 8 different extremes, neither ceasing nor arising, that we looked at last night. Moving to the second pair, neither severed or severing. This we can understand that, for example, our afflicted minds, these can be severed, but their severing is not independent. It is rather dependent on causes, in particular the cultivation of the path, the cultivation of the mental consciousnesses which are contrary to the afflictions. So therefore, in dependence on causes, namely the antidotes, the afflictions can be severed. So therefore, there is not independent severing, but dependent severing.
당선 가상은 체바 메바스 때 가르치 시켜버렸으네 규디기 파 균체제 제부디 끼고 얼베스네 디기고 말 규디 균체제 제부디 아니 균체 체제 규디 파 균체 된 제부시기네 한 규현실에 되는 끼고 디기와요 말세상 규코롱 그 제부디 끼도 가르고 되네 규코롱기 제균 치마지 제부도 못 주고 그래서 제상코 균치고 말해서 가상 디셔와 규디기 제부기에도 규디 균체바이나 제부기에요 말와다 제사다 균체 규디 균체제 제부기고 그래서네 디기고 말해서 균체바 체바메 봐서 제사 균체네 제부기고 말해 마이체반자한다 규디기 균디 제규디 제부도 못 주고 그래서 균체제는 제부기에요 말해서 가상 되네게 셰 아주 제셰 디겨로
Furthermore, last night when we were looking at this first term, neither terminated or neither severing or neither annihilated, further meaning to this that we looked at last night is that a cause arises as a result, and therefore that cause has ceased. There is a continuity that of the cause that continues as the same substance into the result which arises. That continuity is not severed. So here we're looking at those three terms together. The cause from the cause, the result arises, the cause ceases. And there is a continuity of the essence or the entity of the cause through to the result. They are of the same substance. There is not a severing of the continuity of the cause to the result.
Takpa me pala de chisan duji de ki debu kihe le ya ane ko keji keji maji wo yuwa ma zhoba che yuwa debu kihe chiyo ma re chisan de yu korong ane yuwa ma zhoba che debu ngo zhugu na de ka takpa cha de re dene si ma re chisan yu di keji keji yuwa zhugu re yuwa zhugu ne debu di ki go re chisan yu de duji ki che tam je ane ko takpa ya ma re yuwa zhugu re yuwa zhoba de rangi ngwe ne yuwa zhoba de ma re se go da takpa me ba se takpa yuwa kiji yuwa taba mayi kiji yuwa zhugo de ne yuwa rangi ngwe ne yuwa zhugo yu dan jin shen ji le de ne yuwa zhugo de se chi.
The fourth term we looked at last night was nor permanent. So impermanent phenomena change momentarily. The cause changes momentarily. This momentary change is not from its own side, it's not self-existent, but also depends on parts and causes. So there is impermanent phenomena are not permanent, they change momentarily. And in addition, this momentary change, this is not independent or self-existent, but is rather dependent.
Adiso gaba jewa me ba se duji ge che chasang le cha ye de ba de chasang le pe nga ju ge chi ngo bo da su la so ba da nang xie ba da yu yu du ba de ma de chasang le ane ga ba me ba je ba me ba che ba da ba me chasang de cha ja ne xie ye ba wa.
All impermanent phenomena, whatever phenomenon one thinks of, these 8 apply to them. These 8 extremes apply to them.
Na deso nga ju ge so su ge chi chilo ge xing da do la so ba da jungwa shan da de ge ane gyu dan jian le de ne ga go le xia da ane jie de gyu dan jian le de ne ji go le xia da de ne ge du xin de jie ba jin zhe de dong ba ni sam da yo ro wa da nga ju ge da nga ju ge nyam len ba yu ba sam da wei na da so so rang nga su su ran jie wa de ya gyu dan jian da de ngal mil jie wa re chi mil jie wa de ya rang ge ngwe ne jie de yo ma re chi dan yu dan jian meng bo chi le de ne jie wa re chi dan da mil jie de yu dan jian meng bo chi le de ne jie wa na di jie ge gyu de la ga ga gu gu re jian de la ga ga gu gu re di fa xing ju xie da chi dan da di mi jie ge gyu dan jian de ge hao ko na da de nga zu mi jie wa za mong ba na ya mi jie ge don da le ya su sam dan o de gyu di sa gu du a gyu di jie ba ne mi jie tu du a sem be ge da nga zu ge di mi jie ge jie wa chi mai ne ya dian sa bo mi lu to ye ge don da le ya gyu sa tu ya de nga zu ga ce de la nga zu sa ya ge ko han ko hab de ra go da di.
When we were looking at these last night, I used illustrations which are easy to understand, and so therefore in your meditation you can continue to use illustrations which are easy to relate to, as well as when going about one's daily life. Outside there are many trees, stones and so forth, and all of them, whatever we observe in our outer environment, we can recognize arises in dependence on causes, ceases in dependence on causes, and so forth. And in this way, we can reflect on emptiness in a way that's very easy to understand, or easy to relate to. But as practitioners, then you should go deeper. And going deeper, it can also be understood as going more broadly. So we can take ourselves. Just to mention as an aside, as I said last night as the translator, the word arising, this can also be translated as a born. So here, the word born or birth works. So all of us, as sentient beings, we were born, or we arose in this life, we were born. And that was not independent. Our birth was not independent or self-existent, but came about independent on many causes. So here we can reflect now on this topic, but from a conventional point of view, asking ourselves, what were those causes that were accumulated that led to us to have a favorable rebirth as a human being? And this needs to be well recognized so that we can continue to strive to accumulate such causes to have further good rebirths.
지산다 뇽모베리 코와레게 균체고고 쳇바세 코와레게 균체제 탈베고고 토고고 제상 아주기 뇽모바 가바데야 랑신이 가바 메바레스다 다 유단 낀라데나 가고고레세요 다 유단 낀라데나 가고에는 뇽모바 마 메바스에 유디 가레 낀 가레 가네스나 가고고레세 두 심지체도 제산 뇽모바 가야 될야 아주인 콩로게야다 내가 뇽모바 가야 될 샬레 잠제게 삼다야 잠제 고미야 잠제게 삼도데 같이 뉴슈체베네 니게 콘로데 가로야다 안디나시 아니 가지게 동방이 도베 셰랍 동방이 또 동방이 도베 셰랍 곰발에 되네 곰바이나 아니 뇽모바디게 띵이 자완에 가로야다 균체줘야다 자완에 뇽모바치 균체제 아니 탈베고와 토투야 되는 거래 그래서 니네자 뇽모바 가야다 뇽모바 자원의 균체 코와를 깨게 자원의 균체제 탈바다 탐지김보 고와 토발라 아주 냠내 가르쳐고리라는 제상 수림소야라서 받아 아니 진비 냠내자 쇠비 냠내자 아니 그래서 다음에부터 베셔라 고면야다 잠제 냠내자 디스고고래서 제솔을 때네 단념모 가고래 되는 코와를 깨게 균체 지투리에서 제상 균체 받아 가바디 라왕게 가바요 말 라망의 균체바 매바래 매바에는 규단 견 샹래 되네 가고 규단 견 샹래 되네 균체고래 체바에는다 규단 견에 가르래 되고래서도 제산 대솔래 되네 하는 아주 뇽모바 가투고래 뇽모바 균체 균다 제바 매바스 두고래 제산다 코와래 깨와 균체제 탈바다 탐지기 먹고 뭐 두고래 해야지 언도스전에 당한 저기 또 소속이 냠낼 바자도 언도스전에 삼당 공이서라
Again, to further encourage you to reflect broadly here, take the terms ceasing and severing. Here we can reflect in terms of one's afflicted minds. The continuity of samsara itself can be severed. That severing, though, is not done by way of its own nature or independently, but rather is dependent on causes and conditions. So again, this reflection is in relationship to the ultimate truth, to emptiness. But then also look at it conventionally. So what are the causes? Because I'm establishing that the severing of the continuity of samsara is not independent, but dependent on causes. So what are those causes? So for example, when anger of any strength arises within oneself, anger, frustration, annoyance, if one cultivates the temporary antidotes of love and compassion, that will serve for the affliction of anger to cease. Similarly, through the cultivation of the wisdom realizing emptiness, the continuity of all afflictions will cease. So therefore, in order to bring an end to samsara, this comes about in dependence on causes. It is not independent. Causes have to be accumulated. In particular, ethical restraint, love and compassion, wisdom realizing emptiness, as well as many others. These lead to the eradication of the afflicted minds, or the ceasing or severing of the afflicted minds. So this then is a broader way to approach these topics, looking at them both from the point of view of the ultimate as well as the conventional.
Gewadia Rashin to be Gewayom Rashin to be Tombares, Chebadia Rashin to be Chebayomare, Raji Chebayomare, Raji to be Tombares, Tapasia Rashin to be Tombares, Mosu Sonia Tombani, Tombaransi Kungore, in another day, Shulang, Dengi out to get these two big Dengi out to Yamil Pacha and do Karagugorsen, Lengo or Senya, Chisa, Gaba said. Ranching to the government, you don't get in the car, Shana doing the car water. She's a Shana doing the kayaki, Duagel, the Lamdi Karagari said. Gewadiam, Ranching Gewamena, that is Shana doing the key water, Shana doing the key water. Doing the Gewane, dear Cutie Karagari said. Or do Shana that this Dengi to go to water. And this is on the Gachas that Gachasan, the Gachasangi most Tony Gorsungore, Tony Kayasungore. She's on the hanging out to Italia, Yamel Jayada, Kiwana, Shanatini Kiwi, Rangun, Kiwamena, Rangun to be Tomba another, Kiwana Yore, and the Garski was in Shanatini Kiwores, Shanatini Kiwan, Danazan Hazulia, Kiwasan Mujile, Kiwana, TK Yukare, Dugores, Tikiada. That Cheba said, the Gaba said, and Anzu, Yomoba, Gaba, Pacha, and Chebana, Tikaba, and Yukaragore, Kingaragores, Titinganzuniam, Hagovache, Dinganzuniam Leche Tirua.
All 8 of these extremes, they explicitly present emptiness. Through meditating on them, these one meditates on them so as to realize how phenomena exist in reality. But I encourage you to also meditate on them through looking at their implicit meaning. Because all 8 of them, we can say in relation to all 8 of them that, for example, taking the first one, there is not self-existent ceasing or not independent ceasing, but there is ceasing, but it is dependent. There is not independent or self-existent arising, but there is arising that is dependent, and so forth. So reflecting like this, one is reflecting on the explicit presentation that of emptiness, that ceasing, arising, and so forth, they appear to the mind as being independent, but when we investigate, we see they are actually dependent, and therefore they do not exist in the way they appear. And we come to understand emptiness. But then I encourage you to, following that, also reflect on these 8 in terms of their implicit teaching, the conventional way that we should understand these, which is, for example, in terms of ceasing. So there's no independent ceasing, it comes about, but there is ceasing, but it's dependent. So what are the causes that need to be accumulated for my desired ceasing? In other words, for afflictions to cease. And in terms of arising, good rebirth or good qualities, the arising of these does not come about independently, but dependently. So what are those causes? Thinking like this then serves to motivate one to ensure that we accumulate those causes, as well as having an awareness that these causes are empty. So this then, this technique should be applied to all 8 of these extremes.
Janju sem sadige, the Dijin of the Kiwalem, Mili Kiwalem Bala, and Carletini Kiwore City, Yukariki was an other Mikiagi, Mi Kiwalembaina, and Kiwadi, Rashin Kiama, Gudan Kian Latini Kiwores, the Mikiwale King, Gudi Carrela, Takarkores, and Sudim Soya, the Luma is Nejutim, Sudim Soya the Res. Tidadi, Azuke, the Hagore, the Hago, the Danga, the Kiwachima, Mundu Gobalhana, Mi Gowaji Kiwa, Sambaina, Sedelia, Lunga is Nejutim, Sudim Sumbaina, then Lunga is Mgone, and Nejazao in the Chigme, some lodging out to some of the Kazi, Shukchero, Chidini Gom, Yane, and some da Gombaina, and the Nadu Kiwachima, Milutabi Guchagore, Kiwachima Lada, Mi Gobato Guchagore. So that Kiwachima Ladanga, Kiwi Tindelia, Tungi Yaboda, and Yahoji, Yuala, Gudi Carson, setting Jimmy Yam Jeba Delatin Yungore. Says Tungi, Gudan Kim Balungo Mares, and Gudan Kim la Duor, City Carson, Jimmy Yam Jadesa. That is Jig on what somewhat Jig or Sosugo, Wantana, Disuyo Badet, Seba, Swebeon Comlati Ihore said. Chesan, the Nick Jebanza, Nazuki, Gudike, Jawa Chimage, Yahoya, Gudiki, how go you do, Dinyamna Jada. Takiwa said, Lam Lapa Javaina, Lam Jule Kiwala Chavina, Janshu Sim Kiava said, Gudan Kim Mebala Kigoma, Ranshin, Janshu Kim Yorbes and Yores, Ranshin Kiawares and Ranshin Kiwa Yomares, Rangun Winner, Janshu Kiwa Yomares. That Rangun Winner, Janshu Kiwa Mena, and the Kanski Wars and Gudan Kilet in the Kiwores. And that Janshu Ki Gudan Ki in the Kaja, Lavida, Jamba the Ninja Combale, Comore, Dina Janshu Kies. Chesada, Kiawa Meba said, the Mosu Kiawa said, Rangun Winnie Kiawa Yomares, Temple to be Kiawa Yomare, Temasun Yodu, Shula Denla, and the Tianchen Java Dini Kigores. Dini Kiwaina, Gudan Kinkara Kigores, the Rangazuki, Janjusem Kia said, Gudan Kinleti Yobana, and the Kugares, Jamni Comore said, and this Janjusem Kiala, compare Jamni Com not how go, Tigombala Tene, and Rangazuki, Chica, Gasorem. Janshim Lam Gulakia, and Gulan Kilatin, Kitu, but the King Gukar, how going to do, Dingan and Yamlan J2 and the Dick, Yamlan Pachana, those young Horager.
If you engage in the meditation that in the way that I'm presenting it, this is a skillful way to accumulate vast stores of merit. So take, for example, whether there are unwanted or wanted circumstances. For example, unwanted would be the arisal of the afflictions, or wanted would be the arisal of virtuous minds. So here we recognize that these have come about in dependence on causes. They are not independent, even if they may appear to us as such. They are dependent, and therefore can be further accumulated. So being dependent, despite appearing as independent, we understand that they are empty. Moreover, being dependent, we understand by accumulating further such causes, we will achieve wanted results or avoid unwanted results. So for example, wanting to ensure that we arise as or is born as a human being in our next rebirth, we reflect that arising comes about in dependence on causes. It is not independent. It doesn't just happen. So what are those causes? So first seeing that it is independent, despite appearing to be dependent, it is dependent despite appearing to be independent, we recognize that it is empty. And what are those causes then? Primarily ethical restraint, the restraining one's mind from wanting harm to come to others or enacting harm towards others. That is the primary cause. So recognizing this, we understand that the mind of ethical restraint is the primary cause for good rebirth. And the rising of this mind is dependent. Therefore, the more I meditate on ethics, making my mind habituated or familiar with an ethical outlook, I will be creating ever stronger causes. My mind will be becoming ever more ethical, and my behavior and speech will be ever more ethical, and thereby I'll be creating ever stronger causes for good rebirth. Similarly, to ensure that we have favorable material circumstances in our future lives, those too have arisen, and their arising is not independent but dependent. Therefore, their rising is empty of existing in the way that it appears. Being dependent on causes, we therefore strive to develop a generous outlook, a wish to give of ourselves to others, so as to create strong causes to have comfortable material circumstances in our future lives. And continuing with that of patience. Patience is a third cause to ensure that in our future lives we have harmonious relationships with others, we have a personality that is readily harmonious with others, as well as having flawless sense powers. Again, understanding that the mind of patience leads to these results Therefore, it is not independent, but dependent. So it does not exist in the way that it appears. Being dependent means that as I make my mind ever more patient, in other words, not becoming disturbed in the face of adversity, I'll be creating ever stronger causes and have ever greater results in my future lives. And furthermore, if one has the wish for the path of a bodhisattva to arise within oneself, or here we usually say generate, but for the path of a bodhisattva to arise in ourselves, is that independent? And we again look and we see that it is dependent on a variety of causes. Therefore, the arising of the path of a bodhisattva, that is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It is rather dependent, in particular on the causes such as love and compassion, and so forth. Therefore, we encourage ourselves to apply ourselves to cultivating those causes.
Sendi bigi drataro je shingdorik ta mara suel ya gyudan kin denishin denisyungre me gyudan kin denis cheba ni medo denis shagre se bigi ta denigi ha kogan digi gyudan kin da ha godu gyudan kin di beju tang ba tene medo rikta mara sueda saya rikta mara shingdorik ta mara sueda na so chi sue tu sue che ne beju tang tu beju chang ngang juge dunga se ya ta digi tu ya ani chi shoji tu go wa da lumbu kugyo ga te denige lobjo mehenji gimbena ko gariki na dagaramado di gyuwa ta je mang ta ya da yaro soya da di ga mere da 그래서 고 di yago chaya mang chaya da ji gyuwa roya gi gyuden jindi gar게 하고 고 말 되네 제는 디 한 먹어 현장 니마 강 여버디 네 디 용구래 디 매여 차선에 매가 차로라 제자다 하고 관진의 유단계 하고 관진의 유단계 되는신 되는 용거 되는신 되는 용거를 집에 남시 장모라 휴지네 안들야 지금 체리 공부 답제 장등의 소연의 사실이다 안지 제랑으로 지네 될야 지 체리 답제 기토에서 하고 관진이 되는 수투고 봐 하모거나 아다디 남시 장모라 기고 말해서 디마다 가고 싶어 말아 제자 되는 현장 아 저기 개와 미 개와 레기 규단 긴 가르를 때는 기규여 봐도 하고 봐 있나 개와 치마이나 미다 할 개기 규도 줍대 개와 치마 하다 미기 투고로 와 마도 봐나 내가 규도 하 먹어 봐나 규도 사이고 마 규마사바나 밀기 투모든 게 바스카요 말와 디나신 아주 자주심 개의 규단 긴 가르를 때는 기 투고여 심죽 제바나 개하고 규도 하고는 규딩 아주 배제다는 배제 제바나 전심 게 두고와 제가 전심 게 유다 먹거나 전심 게 투여요 말어 디나진 아주 녀몽박 매바스 써야 돼야 매바서 유다 끼인지 하고나 디 베지단에 매바스 투고래 디 유다 끼인데 하 먹거나 안고 매바스 투여 매러와다 언도 진행하는 쪽에다 하고 거야 돼 계시물에 사실 송거를 다 들리네
Encourage you to reflect in this way, combining the understanding of the ultimate and the conventional in meditation. And even if one understands many of these points intellectually, one needs to continue to gather knowledge and reflect on it so as to bring about an actual transformation. So for example, if one has the wish to become a bodhisattva, to generate bodhicitta within oneself, one needs to recognize, firstly, that this comes about, the generation or the rising of bodhicitta comes about independent on causes. When one recognizes this, one will seek out those causes as well as how to accumulate them and then strive to accumulate them. One's wish for bodhicitta to generate, for bodhicitta to arise within oneself will no longer be a mere wish or aspiration. Rather, through having reflected well, one will strive to accumulate these causes. So if we take an example from society, over recent decades certainly, but certainly over the last centuries, as population has grown and scientific knowledge has also increased, there's been ever more emphasis on coming to understand how to increase crop yields. And now, certainly in developed countries, crop yields from the same sized land is significantly higher than it ever was in the past. And this is because scientists have studied what are the most beneficial or impactful causes that need to be accumulated so as to give a large or powerful result. They've gathered this knowledge and implemented it. What we have here is, at first, there was a curiosity that comes with an understanding that a desired result comes about in dependence on causes. Then those causes are investigated, not superficially, not just a mere wondering, but in detail. And then that knowledge was utilized, put into practice. It wasn't left as a mere theory, it was put into practice. And therefore, crop yields are significantly bigger than they've ever been. And the same process is being utilized in terms of how to deal with climate change. Now, if we think of societies, or perhaps just take an individual, someone who has no knowledge of farming and no access to knowledge, and they now try to work as a farmer. Due to a lack of knowledge, they are not going to know what causes are required to bring about a large yield. So they'll do what they can, but the result will be significantly smaller than if they were able to gather the knowledge and enact that knowledge. So too, with our own spiritual development, we need to come to understand the actual situation of our way of thinking, to see which minds are wholesome and which are unwholesome, and what are their causes that lead to their arising, and how to transform ourselves through accumulating the appropriate causes to lead to the desired result. So in dependence on our curiosity in acting, leading to the gathering of knowledge, and that gathering of knowledge being done repeatedly over a sustained period so that it leads to a determination to integrate that knowledge within ourselves. In this way, we have all that is required for transformation. Transformation both in terms of developing wholesome minds, such as bodhicitta, as well as, and accompanying this transformation, the eradication of our afflicted minds, or the ceasing or the severing of our afflicted minds.
And that didn't measure the draw said the draw the one said. Just not one member draw me by such. And didn't draw the one that tell it up done there, rushing about to bury the my share one.
That then serves as the review of what we covered last night. So let's, returning to the text, to the next line, that of neither coming nor going.
That didn't papa draw it said. She's the one that draw said you Yorwa. In that one member draw a member said one member said the girls was on the two on the rangu when you want your mares, rangu to be once your mares. The drawer said draw your the rang when you draw your rang when you draw your mares. She said that rangu when you to be once a me, rang when you to be draw your mares. That's it, Dordu Shushan did it rangu. One said you're there, rang when you to be watch your mother, rang when you to be draw your mother.
To look at these two coming, neither coming nor going, in brief, it's the same meaning as we've seen elsewhere. There is no self-existent or independent coming. There's no self-existent or independent going. Coming and going is dependent. One comes here from over there. One goes over there from here. There is a dependency, an interdependency. There is no self-existent or independent coming or going.
그래서 다 원화세의 랑군의 원화면은 안에 가르치는 일에는 더 현실을 뛰는 원고에서 원화의 현실을 뛰는 원고에서 현가를 뛰고래 공부자연의 공부자의 자화실을 뛰는 원고와 즉 용의의 자화실을 뛰는 안에 원고래 봐줘야 되나 저희의 자화를 뛰는 조고래 그래서 자화실을 뛰는 수원고를 자화실을 뛰는 조고래 그래서 자화를 맞춰봐 조화다 원화의 매화래 그래서 현실을 뛰는 조고래 현실을 뛰는 원고래 그래서 가를 뛰고서 자화제 발지 자화를 뛰는 원고래 자화를 뛰는 조고래 그래서 조화다 원화의 자화를 뛰고래
Coming and going are interdependent. They are not independent. They are dependent on, for example, a mode of transport or on some kind of activity. They are not self-existent.
세상에 삼는 나라 가리어서는 원화에서 곧 출려와래 원화에 라면도 원화세디 나도 삼는 나라 가르쳐서는 강화에마다 랑군의 원화도 랑군의 주바시 능고래 조화세디야 마찬가지라 마도 랑원의 주바식 롤파 능고래 되니게 능고래 나와 나싱아들 되니게 짐바체 용고래 제산디 강라에 마도 랑원의 원화디 라싱 주바 나타세 나와디래 강라에 마도 조화제 강라에 마 랑원의 조화시 나와이나 디야 라싱 주바 나와래 제산디 나와 나시 요래 요 말은 디 나와지 요 말에서 나와디 가서 원화디 강라에 마도 바지 랑원의 원화도 능고래 이내야 된 심지제도 자화를 뛰고 그래. 원화도 자화를 뛰고 그랬어. 조화디 양한도 롤파나도 강라에 맞춰봐 랑군의 조화시 능고 그래. 된 엄마를 제바제도 조화디 자화를 뛰고 그랬어. 지단시 자화를 뛰는 조고 그랬어. 뛰고 그래. 맞춰봐 요 말했어. 난다지 숨어래.
As with the other points here, when you take coming or going, you see how it appears to one's mind. It appears as if it exists by way of its own nature or essence, as if it is independent, not influenced by anything at all. But when we investigate, we come to see that, like other phenomena, it cannot exist in this way. It cannot exist by way of its own nature or independent, not influenced by anything at all, but is rather dependent on, for example, activity. So this is the case for both coming or going.
다 원화는 좋아서 자화를 뛰어봐 자화 라화를 뛰어봐 인정하는 제 하고 거로 benno 직전에 야나 공부하죠 야나 모터실 뛰는 조거마다 현실을 맞춰봐시 또 스테이는 조야스 개미노와 원화세대 야나 지금 모터실 현실을 귀뛰네 용거 야나 공부하자를 뛰네 자화실을 뛰네 용거 받이 디니기 좋아다 원화의 자화실을 뛰어봐디 안주 하고 거로 와다 라화라화 중에서 하고 거로 봐
When we look at these, for example, coming and going, at a superficial level, they're very easy to understand. That to come here was dependent on activity, to go there is dependent on activity. They cannot be, therefore, independent.
라과다 하고 그러데 이내 지금 저기 딩기다 오늘 직십 저보제 원화다 좋아서 현실을 뛰어봐서 직 하모고 와 이제 电信 저와电的做电信真的用话的参谋的还没过完咱这个的让心主把的闹话的搞图过嘛让心主把真把的搞嘛都东把你嘛都把了哇
But the superficial understanding is sufficient to as a starting point. One needs to look in finer detail. This is where it gets more challenging, especially to see how coming and going appear to the mind, and to come to see them as appearing as truly existent or independent. So without recognizing that, merely understanding that, well, coming is dependent on activity, this does not challenge our grasping at true existence.
지나다 좋아세디 안주게 심주를 제대로 갑라 칸치고 있는 좋아세디다 가사 Gansa Drobo Gansa, Drui Java, Drui Lam said, Drui Yu said it. Or those Chene Shimju Chene, Draw said, Rang when Juba to you, Yore Yoma Rang, now and as Draw said, now you do Kabla, Rang Kalama, Rang when you Juba is Nangores. That is Rang when you Juba, now and Shinji, Dana Yomare, Yore Yomares, Cheba Chidu, that by Yawa Chiba Chidu Kabla, draw up a Gansa, draw up a Gansas. Didn't draw you Java, draw you Lam, said Dima Chene, Dana Gansati, Pa Droadi, and Rang when you Droina, and Shalamatuba to Wars. Shalamatuba to Wina, and then drew you Java till Dugo Mares, drew you Javala Matuba, Kanrana, Kanla Matuba Troina, drew you Javala Matuba to Warova. Chedan drew you Javala Matuma, never drew to us. The Niki do Chineda, draw up a Gansa Sada, drew you Java Sada, drew you said, drew you Lam said Shimshi, Delba do China, that's Yawa Cheche, and it Rang when they draw it, can do Sene, that Shimchi, then it Shimchi the Gaja Dondala, Gansa, Temba Troop, Marup, Rang when the Gansa Timber to Tombadi to go on the Tiki.
Java, dan Lam, dan Yul,
Did you have been used when the greatest church part was usual? Lamga didn't address a Lamga or other Jishim, Lam to Yuda, depending on the Sanji, Salrona, draw set a Sanji Sache, then they are drawing a Lam de la Tibaradilan, draw a Yamna Jeric Mangojorua, just not there. Do you draw a Gaza, do you Java, do you Lam, do you said it in the Shiro Chigudua?
When reflecting then on, for example, going, so we readily understand that to going, it cannot be independent, but must be dependent. So let's look at this in a little more detail. If going were independent, it would mean it would not be influenced or impacted by anything at all. Going would not would happen by itself without requiring any dependency on anything at all. Because if it were truly existent, it would be independent. However, there is, firstly, a person who is going. There is the activity of going, perhaps walking, perhaps driving. So the first person, the second activity, the third, or perhaps third and fourth, is the destination. Yeah, the destination or the road that is utilized. So, for example, if one goes to the stupa, there is the person who is going, there is the walking to the stupa, they're going along a little path, and their destination is the stupa. So here we see that there is an interdependency of all of these coming together for there to be going. If going were independent, it wouldn't require any of these to occur. So therefore, going must be empty of existing in the way that it appears, empty of existing by way of its own nature. Then look at each of those different parts. So I mentioned that going is dependent. It's dependent on a person who's going, their activity of going, and their destination or the road by which they go. So look at each of those different parts. So I mentioned that going is dependent, it's dependent on a person who's going, their activity of going, and their destination or the road by which they go. So look at each of those. So for example, the person. If the person who is going were independent, they would not be influenced by anything at all. The person would not need to engage in an activity in order to go somewhere. But that is not the case. So therefore we can see there is an interdependence between the person and the activity that they are engaging in for there to be going or movement.
Dugo Duen Tugore did Ransing Rangun in Tuban, Combatia Maduba Chetua Shawa Disha Mares. Tis not the Niki Combatia Mad, the Trivi Java Kansatia, and Tuhopo Kansasia, and the Gagiris. Trivi Java de Gamba Pagutangachi was. Chisa Kansati, and then Pumbo de Rebes, and Nang Sheba de Bes, Troipo Kansatia, Candice Shimjina, and the Tashi Chibitsena, Kansatia Nigmares.
So we understand here, in this illustration of going to the stupa, that that going itself is dependent on the person, on the activity, and the road and destination. And there's an interrelationship between, an interdependency between all of these. Then walking itself is dependent, the activity of walking, because the activity of walking requires a person that is walking. So if we then move to, well, this person who is going, who is engaging in the activity of walking, is this person perhaps independent? What is this person? So we talk about a person who is walking, so we may think, oh, it's their body, because it's the body that is walking. And then here too, we investigate and come to recognize that the person is not the body. Neither the person or body exists by way of its own nature.
Na de na lang ji zhuo da wa xie di jiao le due ne an yu de le zhuo hu ma de jiao la ma due ba chui min du xi zang an de zhuo di jiao qi le due ne zhuo hu ma due ba le zhuo min du rang gong ne zhuo ba rang wen ne zhuo min du a se da gan xi le zhuo yo re de zhuo de rang gong ne gan le ma due ba rang gong ne zhuo ma de jiao qi le due hu le jiao de yang Drosa Lamga de Latun to go, but the Lamga, just a Lamga meba de Joya, Maris, Lam de Meba Josem. Chesa Droa Gansa di Droa di Joya Chavala du. Joya Java dia, Drosa Lamla du. Drosa Lam Droa de, you Drosa Udil du, Drosa Udilpa, Medun to go, you Drosa Udimena, then Joya Koyoma. Chesa Dinesa, Droy, Drobo Gansa di Joya di Joal. Joal Jawela Dugore, Javadia, and Lamla dia to Yula Dugore said. She's a one dia, Chiparatati, one dia, two on said Javala dinner, young. The dinner, one said the Lamla dinner, you won't say you let dinner. She's such hell, Chichi dinner, young too much. Madio by the Rangun when they draw us at your mother's Rangun to be Jawa, never says.
What I'm encouraging you to do here is, when you're engaging in these meditations, I present them in a way that's very simple and easy to understand. Then in your meditation, look at it more broadly and thereby go to deeper levels. Because if you just leave it at, there is no independent going, it's clearly dependent on a person and the activity and the path and destination, and that's not going to lead to much transformation. But then go into each of these and look at them. So we mentioned about the person. One can also look at the activity of walking. This too is dependent. It's dependent on there being a person. It's dependent on there being a road. Dependent on the intention and so forth. So there's no truly existent walking either. No truly existent going or person or walking and so forth. So in this way, in your meditation, you're looking at far more objects, seeing. We just started here with going, but one's looking at far more objects, recognizing that whilst they appear as independent, as unconnected, fixed and static, they are actually part of a process, a dynamic flow. So this then shakes up our grasping at phenomena as existing in the way that they appear. As we move our focus in the meditation from one object to the next, recognizing nothing exists in the way that it appears. Rather, it exists dependently. So that's how I encourage you to meditate ongoing, but with all of them the same. So here, particularly coming, entirely the same. If you come here, it's independence on from over there, dependence on a person, on an activity, a road and a destination, and so forth. So engage in these meditations, looking from a variety of perspectives, and in this way, shake up this grasping at your existence. In these meditations, as you go from object to object, always also look at the person. So in this case, coming or going, who is the person who has come here or is going to the stupa, for example? Who is this person? What is this person? Am I my body? Am I my mind? So for example, there is the intention to go. There's the feeling of going. That maybe it's a pleasant or an unpleasant feeling. Am I any of these consciousnesses? If I were, that means that consciousness would always be present and unchanging, independent, couldn't be impacted by anything at all. But what happens when there is no intention to go? Do I cease to exist? Or if whatever feeling I'm presently feeling, maybe in the meditation one's mind is very calm and peaceful, what happens when that's lost, that pleasant feeling is lost? Do I become non-existent? We start to see that I may associate myself as being my mind, but I am not. I do not, the person that exists in the way that appears as independent, cannot be found anywhere within the physical or mental aggregates. In Nagarjuna's text from which this quotation is drawn, the fundamental wisdom of the Middle Way, each of these 8 extremes are analyzed in great detail in different chapters. So let's look here, just give you further guidance on how to continue to look at these. So take, say, coming. We have all come into this life. So we've come from somewhere, our previous life, and we've come into this life. This process of coming came about in dependence on causes. On a causa level, the causes would have been our particular parents in this life, as well as then the consciousness in our previous life coming to this life. But at a deeper level, what brought us to this particular rebirth will be in dependence on many other causes. Primarily, to have been born as a human, we accumulated powerful causes of ethics. So again, we're reminded of the need to generate ethics, to cultivate the mind of the ethical restraint, so as to have ever stronger, more powerful causes ensuring good rebirths in future lives.
Gewa Chiman Pa Hores, Chisan Droadia, Rangu Wene, Droya Yomares, Chisan Yudan Yenchile in Hores, that Gewa Chimo Drosa de Kawayasan, Halo Droya, Mil Droya, that thing as you do Nansol Droya, Dendra Nanso, Nando Nili Drosadi, Sajil Masona di Droya Uditi Roa, Chisan Dadi, Canese Delia, and the Droadi, Rangu Wene Droa Mebanza. 先起了对呢，讲话了对呢，做活来事情。其实大体主要了呀，按你举点见了对呢，做活办呢，举点见开始呢，他的没有过方，他也带了出来的了，具体俺就开始撒活了是呢，就这么说啊，带了对呢，做活来，就这么说啊。现在俺送了主要的开始呢，来到娘们俺本来个说的，地边来这边个地边来撒把了对呢，做活来。现在的那啥的。 给我起码啊，就米路米当，他的米国方去的做300呢，当然这个地区的啊，就这么说呀的，也是别这些啥呀的，俺这个金边年们家，随便年们家的，俺尊重年们家，俺这个给我起码他的米温州国方，头发需要是别啊，就给我撒下把的得了呀，那我家呀，俺都现在居住过来，才去，那当然你不管是年们爬家里都现在生活了吧。
And so too with going. And just to say as an aside, the word for going is the same word as migrating or migrator. So going, we can therefore understand being the same word as migrating. It can also be understood as going from this life to the next, migrating from life to life. This comes about in dependence on causes. It is not independent. And there are only 2 destinations that one can go to, that of the high realms or the lower realms. Only those 2 destinations. And whether one goes to the higher or lower realms is due to causes, is dependent on causes. This you've heard many times. But if one is still struggling to have at the forefront of one's mind the need to always be accumulating the causes for lives beyond this needs to be reflected on far more. Like that, one will come to understand that which path we take in terms of going to our next life is dependent on the causes accumulated now. If the afflicted minds are strong and dominant, one's likely to fall into the lower realms. If virtuous minds, in particular ethical restraint, is strong and dominant, one is more likely to take rebirth in the higher realms. Understanding this then, at all times, we will guard our mind, ensuring it is ethical, that we restrain our mind from wanting harm to come to others or enacting harm for others.
做些的，香港这个南过年过度票啊，今年呀，真是身边的南了，他把了做啊，他们去看把了做啊，些的，这是做的呀，的那个他们去看表过，他表过忘了呀，做呀，他们去看表过忘了做呀，那个这个真是身边过忘了做呀，这是过忘呀，做呀，天， rang wene joyo mares and karis in the karistores gyudan kien shenchile dune jugores that gyudan kien karil dugores the dang jugim ya and chike tarbadan tamjiki ko pon joyala niga zulunga yeju de chudun soata and tarbadoni ge samlo jaya samlo geya darjaya and jamni je komya dene janshu semgyule geya dene phajin juge nyamne deso jebale dene da sanyo ko ma dogo sanye ya jugore just that nyamne lam nyamne jawa nyamne 제의 자와로 와다 소소라 강사라니 냠네 조어 보디체 디게 조야라 가르치 오라서네 아주 냠네 자와 지고라 자와 가르치 오라서네 미에종 고미하다 잠니 지고야 잔슈스임 고야 데네 동요도 베샤라 고미하라서 진 제바이나 다상예살 조야라 데네 조고레 사시 도신다 아주 람레야 고모데 야조와 세베네 유단 긴 샹라 뛴的조고 마도 유단 긴 가래 마되바 tarbi 고방을 줘요 말 상요 고방을 줘요 말에 사지 야 송어로
Further way to approach going is in understanding or thinking about going to liberation or enlightenment. The attainment, the rising of, in the state of a liberated state or an enlightened state, comes about in dependence on causes. So one has the wish to attain freedom from suffering, liberation, or to become a being of great benefit, an enlightened being. Going to such a state comes about independent on causes. When one reflects on this well, the result is one will apply oneself to cultivating the progressive levels of training of one's mind. One will not merely understand intellectually that one needs to accumulate a number of causes, one will have realized so, and thereby readily and with ease will apply oneself to accumulating the causes such as definite emergence or renunciation. Understanding that definite emergence too is a dependent arising. It comes about in dependence on causes, primarily reflecting on the myriad sufferings of samsara and its causes. One wants to become a Buddha for the sake of others. This comes about in dependence on progressive stages of training. It is not independent. It doesn't just happen. Causes must be accumulated. And the specific causes are bodhicitta, which comes about in dependence on compassion, and then engaging in the trainings of a bodhisattva. So here, when one reflects on going towards liberation and enlightenment, one reflects that this only comes about in dependence on causes, and what those causes are, and that they too come about in dependence on causes. Reflecting like this gives one a confidence, a determination to apply oneself to accumulating those causes.
Dine ginzadang azo tenda nyingbo di garagugo sine onwa diya rangu ngonyes onwa diyo mares da onwa sede pachone tsu onwa kiawa ngamane diru onwa sede ne jiki onwa de jera dine drowa diya 강라에 마도 랑문이 좋아요 말에 세디 좋아디야 가서 데네 안지 파셜 좋아서 데네 기와 치말 좋아서 데네야 안람 똑바 권의 공도 좋아서 돼 디수 차선 좋아디야 강라에 마도 랑문이 좋아요 말 용어 좋아요 말에서 다 데네 잔다 강라에 마도 바랑문이 좋으면 가르레스네 先记了对的中国人是中国文化的先了对的用过的这些定见之后中华是其实先记了对的文化的用过的先记了对的中华的中国人其实定见之后中华人是那这的短大的宁波都是对的这些的
So with this line, neither coming nor going, the meaning in brief is the same as for all of these lines, in that there is, can be said, if one would say it in an expanded way, neither self-existent coming, there's only coming that is dependent, nor independent going, only going that is dependent. So here, in the meditation, one reflects on regular coming and going as we use it in our daily life, as well as that we came to this birth, to this life, and we will go to a future life. And we have an aspiration to go not only to a good future rebirth, but to go or to progress towards liberation or enlightenment. And all of this comes about in dependence on causes. Coming or going is not independent. That we attained or we came into this rebirth was independent on causes. And to go to a similar rebirth, as well as to go towards liberation and enlightenment, is dependent on causes. Reflecting like this, again, it gives us ever greater conviction to apply ourselves to cultivating those causes.
조선 조야된 현실을 되는 두고 강남 마디오 바지 조선 조야 말와 잘라지 진여변의 조선 바르고 말은 요 디나시 모저디네 현실을 되는 두고서 다도 단닝볼다 다 좋아도 온화데 차상 오부 뒤시 차상이야 자야에 되버지 다도 단닝봉 알아서 삼다에 갈당 거라서는 땅 알아서 랑기 소수기 냠낸 파자제 삼다변에 땅아 개와 침망아만엔 디온와디 강라에 마다 랑원의 주바세 랑원의 용화데 자오이네 말이야 선배 다 랑원의 주바세 용화데 자오이네 말이야 선배 다 랑원의 주베 용화만나 아니 유단 见 가르치 용화서 유단 见了 되는 용화레스 제가 당아 대용화도 유단 见의 되는 가르용 유단 见 가르치 용화서 유단의 샤 선배게 되는게 당아서 하고 봐지 당아 님이 조어로 와다 그지나 된 그디 나다 된자고 되투야 매바 지금이 조고로다 저 조고자 디 조야 돼야 다 유단见了 되는 조고레스 제가 조사 야가딜에 유단 见了 되는 조고르마도 랑그 뭐네 근데 조사 야가딜에 조사 요마 랑원에 조야 요마를 와스 매바서 유단 见了 되는 조고레스 다 유단 见的 카레스에 야가딜 로반 유단 见的 카레스에 아주 링아 예수 예제된 수rim소야 아니 진배 냠내 쇠배 냠는지야 나 전적인 냠내자 대수 냠는 제바이나 한개와 치마이네야 조사 약부지를 봐주고 그래서 제단 세디나자 안되네 개와 치마네 약보용하게 되네서 당한 저기 네 조화디 규단见了 된 조고인사 몽바나 약보의 조사기 규단 见된 하나도 다 되네 배수체하기 다 배수체할이야 하늘 라리고 장한주 배수체화도 계시물에서 다 소수기 냠는 자반의 두스자 안디나신 마주야 람고말이야 당아 체들이야 전주 셈바치와 전주 셈규를 끼고 선배네 대개와 전주 셈발이야 살 줘야지 규단 깨라 마되바 줘야 매바래 지산 전주 셈된 가는 규를 추게 용화돼야 규단 깨라 마되바 용화에 매바래 지산 규단 깨라 되는 용고래 대리 가르라람나 다 잠니제 거미하다 안 하산남다 디고발에 되는 용고래 뒤에서 전주 셈된 규를 용화야야 인규디 잠니제데 돼서 무티네 공부에 선배기 되는 배수식인 선배 삼다면나 당아줄이야 오하메 봐 조하메 봐시 칙티게 삼다네 나아주 냠는 잡아야나 인게와 치마 사다미고 봐 토역이 안 주규사야래 안 야탈바다 탐지기 먹고 규사에게 냠는 제약이 가르가르 냠는 제고 봐 되게 봐 냠는 제야다 배수에디 야고용 토야에 자고로 와다
With these 8 points, I encourage you to reflect on them in your meditation, but also in your daily activities. So continuing just with the two we're looking at, coming and going. At one point, this class will end, this time will be gone, and you will go somewhere else. Later, you will drive somewhere else. So here you can reflect on going. You can also reflect because you'll be arriving at a destination, therefore you came there. Reflect how this all came about in dependence on causes. And when you drive home later, that you are then going is dependent on your car. That you have a car is itself dependent on many causes. For example, that you have sufficient money to not only buy the car, but maintain it and pay its expenses. So in this way, you see that it's very easy to apply these points throughout the day as we're going about our daily business, to be aware of ceasing, arising, coming and going, and severing and permanent. And thereby keep this topic fresh in your mind. And certainly, not only should you relate to it to one's everyday life, but in particular to that of spiritual development, reflecting on how we came into this life independent on causes. There's a reason that we have the particular rebirth we have, and that is it came about independence on causes that were accumulated. So too, when we go to our future life. So the point of going to our future life will happen for all of us at a time that is unexpected, unplanned, and most probably unwanted. But it will come. And that going, at that point, will have come about independence on causes. And where we go to will come about independence on causes. So, and what are those? So these, as I mentioned, ethical restraint, generosity, patience, choice, perseverance. Therefore, I need to guard my mind, ensuring that my mind is ethical, that I'm seeking opportunities to give of myself to others, that I stay patient in the face of adversity, and I delight in my virtuous activities. So this way of thinking is incorporating the Dharma in all our activities, not just on the cushion, not just in the teaching hall here, but in all our activities. And if one has the aspiration to go to the state of a bodhisattva, in other words, to give rise to the mind of bodhicitta, remind yourself, being suitable to be labeled bodhisattva is dependent on the generation of bodhicitta. The generation of bodhicitta is dependent on the accumulation of causes. None of these things are independent. They arise in dependence on causes. Therefore, if I want to arise, for bodhicitta to arise in my continuum, to be suitable to be labeled as a bodhisattva, I need to cultivate the causes, love, compassion, and the altruistic attitude of universal responsibility. So thinking like this, we can do both on our cushion and in this class, as well as in our everyday life.
rang ngone drupti be thade ba se yo mare sa da jidan donda jikba se donjik se yo de ina rang ngone drupti donjik se yo mare rang ngone drupti thade yo ma rang ngone drupti donjik yo mare sa da thade de me donjik mi se de donda ningbora tik dordu shu ba na dire da thade se de rang ngone drupti gen thade ji me bare rang ngone drupti donjik ya me res jidan rang ngone drupti tong wa re sa ji.
Let's go to the fourth grouping of terms here, neither different nor the same or nor identical. So just before I come to Genla's commentary, just to say on these terms, so this last one, nor the same, nor identical, can also be nor one, it's the same word. And different, as we'll hear from Genla's explanation, it can be many, although that is a different Tibetan word. But the meaning would be the same. So now to come to Genla's commentary.
Distinct sometimes.
Or distinct. So neither different nor identical. So to look at this in brief will be the same as with the previous six. Neither independent, different, but different that is dependent. Not independent, identical, but dependent, identical. And to flesh that out just a little, that something being different or identical implies that it is either different to something or identical with something. So therefore there is, from the outset, it's visible that there is a relationship of interdependency. So therefore, being different or being identical cannot be self-existent, but is rather dependent.
다 타데세디 아니 요니 요래 이나 랑고 뭐니 줍되겐 주여바나 타데세데 강라야 마되바 그런 타데바 주요거래 디니스요 말해서 랑고니 줍에 타데바 주요 말해서 안디 가르래는 다 가르 아니 가르제래서는 난 타데바세 셴라 찍라 셴지를 뛰네 타데세 용거래서 찍세에 대한 셴지를 뛰네 찍 용거마다 강라 마되바데 찍 용거 말 진짜 셴라 뛰네 용거래서 다 타데바세디 근데 취니디 타데바르지 파조델 찍델라 뛰네 안에 주 타데바사 샤고르마도 찍라 마도바 타데샤요 말에세 찍세에 대한 타데발라 뛰네 안디 찍레스 샤고르마데 데네게 타데발라 마도바 찍리샤면 세상 타데세에 대한 현실을 뛰네 용고래 찍세에 대한 현실을 뛰네 주바지레 용고래세 찍세에 대 타데바지를 뛰네 찍샤고르와 파조 니제 수조라 다 니메바지네 찍르와다 제가 타데발라 뛰네 찍샤고르마도 다 니여나 타데레 찍라 뛰네 타데샤고르 타데라 뛰네 찍샤고르
In general, it certainly can be said that there are things can be different and they can be identical. But being different and identical is not self-existent or independent, but is rather dependent. That some things are different shows that being different cannot be independent, because to be different from something shows there's a relationship to something, and therefore it is independent. So therefore being different cannot be self-existent, but has to be interdependent. And so too with being identical or the same. So something to be identical implies that it's identical to something, that it's one and therefore not something else. So therefore, if we look at it as one or as identical, it implies that it's not something else. So therefore, there we see a relationship of interdependency and not self-existence.
다 더디는 타데세디 강라에마 랑응외는 줍디겐 타데지요 말에세 타데세요 말에세 다네 타데세 간디쇼스네 강라에마 랑응외는 줍어지 매바네 현실을 뛰네 타데지 용거리 현실을 뛰네 타데 용거리에스 디나신 직세에 대한 강라에마도 랑응외는 줍이 직세디 요마 랑응외는 줍이 동바레스 이나 현실을 뛰네 직세의 용어를 땡지 현실을 뛰네 직사야요래 현실을 뛰네 타데세 샤요래 마도 현실을 마도바 타데다 직 자리요 말에서 나 닝보디세 돌드나.
In brief, the meaning for both, neither different nor the same, is that phenomena that are different, that being different is not self-existent or from its own side, but is rather interdependent, and therefore is being different is empty of being truly existent or existent by way of its own nature, because it is not independent but dependent. And so too with being the same or identical or being one. Something is not identical from its own nature, or by way of its own nature rather, but this is too an interdependency, and therefore is empty of existing by way of its own nature.
아디 되세 양진 개발과 시행도 다 자와다 제법벌잖아 시고래 자와다 제법보 제자당아도 내가 지한 내가 지한 제법보시다 다 내가 집이 자와니보디 강사 제법보다 강사지기 자와집이 자와니보디 랑응원은 주비가 타데바시레베 랑응원 주바를 랑응원 마주바레스 다디 심주지고 타데바시데 제자다 자와 제법보다 자원이보다 랑응원은 주비게 타데바지 말레스 곧 랑응원은 주비 타데바 말레스 그래서네 랑응원 주바 찍찍을 뛴거래서 제자 자와 제법보다 자와를 뛰네 자와 제법보 차고를 마도 자와를 매되나 마도바 자와 제법보 말레스 제자 자와시에 대한 자와 제법보 찍을 뛰네 자와의 샤고를 마도 제법보 맨날 자와샤요 말지다 자와당 자와 제법보 이디 찍찍을 뛰네 주고를 마도 마도바시 rang ngone thade ba mare saji ta ngor du sungor den ma.
Look at a deeper meaning of different. So if we take someone and their activity, or in Tibetan's literally the doer and the doing, so the person and their activity, the person and the activity are different, but not different from their own side or by way of their own nature. These are not unrelated. Rather, there is an interdependency or mutual dependency between the person and their activity. So they are different, but not different from its own side, but by way, but there is rather an interdependency or mutual dependency between the person and their activity, or the doer and their activity.
Jawa jebo bodan Jawa nibodi ranshin tube tade baya mare ranshin tube duen jigya mares. Jawa jebo bodan Jawa jege nibodi rang ngone tube tade baya mare rang ngone tube jigya mare so jigya mare tade rang ngone tube jigya mare rang ngone tube tade baya mares. 제사당 지단에 저기 예배네 안에 지기와 안에 다대인 거래. 디니 조서 디니 말이요 말. 안에 미네 미니도 세다 미직도 세다 지글에 마어여네 다대 바르와 지마도 맨에 지르와. 제사 가리네 지다 다대 디니보 나네 뒤로 거래. 디니가 마인 바시요 말. 제사다 자와 제보보다 가사 니보디 자와 제보보다 자와 니보디 지그리베 다대래라는 아주 다대래 지단에 다대래 소래. 다 지금 말해서 다 라신이 주비기 직레벨라는 타데르베스는 라신이 주비 타데 말해서 다 자와 다 라신 주비 타데 있나 아니 자와디 제법을 뛰고 말해 제법이 자와를 뛰고미도 제산 자와 제법면나 자와 요고래 네 자와면나 제법을 샤고래 세도 디니기 균딘데 용고래서 송거다 된다라 자와 제법보다 자와 니보디 라신 주비 타데야 말해 라신 주비 지기야 말해 제산 자와 제법보다 자와인데 타데레 파 현실에 자와 제법의 자와를 파 떼봐다 제와 자와의 자와 제법을 떼봐지 진짜 떼는 주바지래서 땡진 자와죠 직직래 떼네 주바래 직직래 떼네 용어를 맞대봐지 용어야 말해서 어떤지 소리.
What exists can either exist as being dependent, as being different or the same or one. It cannot exist as anything other than that. What exists will either be different or the same. So if something exists by way of its own nature inherently, it would either exist inherently different or inherently the same. But when we look here, we see that the person and the activity cannot be inherently different nor inherently the same. Neither is possible because they are dependent, mutually dependent. Between the person and activity, there is a relationship of dependency. If the person and the activity were inherently different or inherently the same, there would be no mutually dependent relationship. But when we investigate, we see that is not the case. That they are different, but that difference is a dependency. It is not independent.
어디 다디미 세데. 나 자와 디나 신당 안데 자와 제세디 레가 카르지나 베네 리모트 투비 자와 제 리모트 바나 리모트 hen 가사티나 리모트 자와 제 제사다 자와인이 라시 투비 타데 디나 신당 아 주게 람 냠는 제바이네 아주 람 공хэн 가사된 람 공비 자와 안 제수차사 랑 원이 주비기 말해서 제사 공바보다 공자다 아니 공비 유 차사 다신 집에서 랑 원이 주비 동바래 사지 제상아 저기 지금 냠는 지도급래 공바다 공바보다 공지 차사 아니 동바인도 교류세지 공부 동바인이래 세sam고 동고로 와지다 공자다 공바보다 공비 차사 랑 원이 주비 동바래 집에 농이 삼다야 돼 용고로 와지자 진짜 자와 제보보다 제위 유당 제위 자와세다 간디신 집에는 다신 집에서 랑원은 주바데 자오기도 요마래 사지 도신 송어를 나디래.
an illustration that's easy to understand is a drawing and a person doing the drawing. So the activity of drawing and the person doing the drawing, they are not inherently one or different. So that's the starting point to go to a deeper level. Take a person who has a path generated in the continuum, as well as the cultivation of the path. So here we have the activity, the cultivation of the path, and the person doing the activity. So the person who has cultivated a path. Neither are inherently one nor inherently different. Both are empty of existing by way of their own nature.
Jawa Jebo Boda, Jawa Chazan, Rang Wayne Drupachiyoma, Rang Wayne Drupachina, Chichila Mateba, Yuoguna Joy meeting series, Yuoguna, Rang Wayne Drupa, Yuoguna, Dambo Kansuna, Taharare, Shenjila Dugo Mare, Yuojoya Mare, Rang Wayne Drupaina. Chizada Onwa down Joa said the Rang Wayne Maduba in San Carson, Shenjila Duna Joa, than Shenjila Duna Onwares. Jiza Jawa than Jeba said. Jabopoje, Jawale Dugore, Jawasan Jabopol Dugores, Chizan Duodugores, Duodugores. That Duodugo by Nadang as a career said that Dandalang as a Karinyam and Jiwasine. Chiza Duodugo by Shenjil Dinner to was an Akiwa Chima Yakuchi, Hada Muko, Yakoyawashida, Di Yule Dine, and the Yakoya the Sutu was a Nenga to Gusayadi, that Jiggy Gusayadi. Tarbata Tamji Kimbo Tobale, Yudan Kin Shenshil, Dune Juguobaza, D. Yusaidire. She's not done any bodang as a courage Jawaresene. Tangan Juge, Semja Tamji, the San Yoko, Toba Chigi, Sempi, Samlo, Diniji, Gune Laje, D. Zangi, Luma Yusum Yokone, and then Niechugi, Sawa in a Jigime, Sempe, Samlo Tavena, that Janjusim Yukune Laje, Tsudumson de Chagore. She's not Dine Zadi, Jugi, Yawachima. And Sanjoko about to be Guyan to water, Jawachima Hada Muko to Guyan Chatu water, said, Tanganzo Dirwa. That Jenny is at the nation, Tangi Luma, Shenyu, Shenley, Pemba, and the Chikangitone, Shenley, Pemba, Kantu, Chigi, Sibi, Pando, Tugi, Sempe, some Davena, and the Chigi. Dinajin, that is Tsudim Song, do, and the Subinyam and Daily or that Negi, Ganga Katsu, Chigaya, and Kale capturing it to Sungi Sempe, some Tavena, Subinyam Ligorova. The Nigeta Sosuki, Kiwi Jawa Jebal Bear, Yahore, Shala Pemba Jebada, the Nigi, Shala nearby Bang took the Bear, Hore, Sempe, Yana and the Duschans combined, Zunju Chegorova. The Nisa Digi Danga to get Jawachima, Hada Muko Vatoya, the Tabioko Vatoya Chegore, Jawa Chisantinigi, Katsio, Samlodio, Ngomba Shukchevaina, Tarbatamji Kiko Valtoya, Tanya Rugores, that the Nining Boarding Anzuki. That the drinky shaping the Yamsuli and around the Lalan Tawadi, Karelamna, she has some gentlemen Jawadi Dena, some Taya Chick, she and some Jaduna Jana, some Taya Chick, the knee some Dane, thank you, San Diego, Top the Yahoo, San Diego, Top Show, some like that. Thank you, San Diego, Toya, Dandalia, that you may use your connection there. Never side is our in the chigme, some big Tawa chigme, some time and Sujim, the song that Yawachimada, the Yawasai, the Chagorwa. The names that dinner ginger serve some diada, Zunji some diet to Sine, Javaina, Jimmy Yamna some time and the the some not diet, the Danaji Dushina some diaderwa, Cisadi, Daway, Danaji, Dundadi, Gio, Jiki, Diki, that Dundadi water, Yamna Joide. Tada. She said that she was Java and Java Selarua, Java and Java said. She said that Java the Karen, Java, Java Polo, Java Dugo, and Yamlin Java Dugo, Java Chimal Droyada, Java Yapo Joyala, Java Dugo says. She's not Tadi said Java and Java Dugo.
And to summarize what we've looked at this morning, So we've looked at 4 terms, neither coming nor going, neither different nor the same. Here, the reflection is, as with the previous 4, to recognize that these, like all phenomena, appear to our consciousness as if they were independent. The consequences of that would be they could not be influenced by anything at all. No other causes or phenomena could impact them at all, and therefore they would be unable to change. They wouldn't be influenced by anything at all. So therefore, if coming into this life or going to the next life were independent, it could not be influenced by any causes. But this is not the case. Rather, there are causes that were accumulated and therefore led to this rebirth. And similarly, there are causes to be accumulated that will lead to future good rebirths as well as spiritual development towards liberation and enlightenment. So here we're reflecting on coming and going. What are those causes? So therefore, we reflect on primarily ethical restraint, because ethics is the primary cause for a good rebirth. And a good rebirth is not only indispensable so as not to fall into the lower realms, but to enable our spiritual development. Moreover, if we have as our wish the determination to become a bodhisattva for the sake of others, those causes too need to be accumulated. So these two can be expressed in a morning meditation with the determination, I will not harm others. I will ensure my mind even doesn't go in a harmful way, and rather I will only benefit others, ensuring my mind is always wanting the best for others. Moreover, one reflects, having reflected on ethics, reflecting on generosity, that in order to have good conditions in my future lives, as well as to have favorable circumstances to aid my spiritual development and to be of ever more benefit for others, I need to cultivate a generous attitude, a wish to give of myself to others. And thirdly, to ensure that in future rebirths I have harmonious relationships with others and my sense powers are sound, I must ensure that my mind is undisturbed in the face of adversity. And then fourthly, in this meditation and all my activities of virtue, delight in this, and thereby gain ever a greater determination to persevere in my accumulation of virtue and be of ever greater benefit to others. So in this way, I accumulate the causes for good rebirths as well as to progress to liberation and enlightenment. Moreover, the person engaging in this meditation, as well as each meditation itself, does the person and the meditation, so the doer and the activity, do they exist as inherently different or inherently the same? And here we reflect that the person and the activity are not inherently different nor inherently the same. They are mutually dependent. There is a relationship and influence between them. So here, in the meditation, we have meditated on the path to enlightenment, and we've included within that 4 of these points, neither coming nor going, nor different nor the same. So this is how, in meditation, you can use this what we've looked at this morning. So thank you. Then we'll conclude for our morning here. If you have some questions, feel free to ask.